संसारदावा नललीढलोका त्रणाय कारुण्य घना घनात्वम् संसारदावा नललीढलोका त्रणाय कारुण्य घना घनात्वम् प्राप्तस्य कल्याण गुणरानवस्य वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दम् महाप्रभुर्कीर्तन नृत्य गीता वादित्रमाध्यान् मनसोरसेना रोमाञ्चकम्पाश्रुतरङ्गभाजो वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दम् श्रीविग्रहाराधननित्य नाम्ना शृङ्गारतन्मान्धिरमजनादो युक्तस्य भक्तां स्तनयुञ्जतोऽपि वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दम् युक्तस्य भक्तां स्तनयुञ्जतोऽपि वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दम् चतुर्विधा श्री भगवत्प्रसाद स्वादन्न तृप्तान् हरिभक्त संगा चतुर्विधा श्री भगवत्प्रसाद स्वादन्न तृप्तान् हरिभक्त संगान् कृत्वैव तृप्तिं भजत सदैव वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दम् कृत्वैव तृप्तिं भजत सदैव वन्दे गुरो श्री चरणारविन्दम् श्रीराधिका माधवयोरपार माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्ना श्रीराधिका माधवयोरपार माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्ना प्रतीक्षणास्वाधनलोलुपस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दा निकुञ्जयोनो रतिकेलिसिद्ध्यै यायालिभिर्योक्तिरपेक्षणीया तत्रातिधक्षात् अतिवल्लभस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दा साक्षाद्धरित्वेन समस्तशास्त्रे उक्तस्तथा वा यत एव सद्भिः किन्तु प्रभोर्या प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दा किन्तु प्रभोर्या प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दा यस्य प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसाद यस्य प्रसादात् न गति कुतोऽपि यस्य प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसाद यस्य प्रसादात् न गति कुतोऽपि ध्यायं स्तुवांस्तस्य यस्य स्त्रीसन्ध्यां वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दा ध्यायं स्तुवांस्तस्य यस्य स्त्रीसन्ध्यां वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणारविन्दा नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिते नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देश तारिणे Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Nila Madhav, Radha Nila Madhav, Shri Radhe. Jaya Krishna Balaram, Jaya Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram, Jaya Krishna Balaram. Jaya Radha Sham Sundar, Radha Sham Sundar, Shri Radhe. Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai. Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Gurudev, Srila Gurudev, Jai Gurudev. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol. Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol.
Namami Swaram Sachitanandarupam Lasat Kundalangoku Lebrajamanam Namami Swaram Sachitanandarupam Lasat Kundalangoku Lebrajamanam Yashoda Biyoluka Ladavamanam Paramritam Atyanta Todruta Gopya Dantamohurnetra Yugmam Rijantam Karamboja Yugmena Satankanetram Mohoswasakampa Trirekankakanta Stitha Graivam Damoda Ram Bhakti Badam Iti Drishva Leelai Berananta Kunde Swagoshami Majantam Akhyapayantam Swagoshami Majantam Akhyapayantam Tadiyeshu Tagneshu Bhaktajitatvam Puna Primatastam Sa Tavriti Vande Primatastam Tavriti Vande Varam Deva Moksham Va Moksham Vadim Va Nachanyam Vareham Va Reshadapiha Idam Teva Purnata Gopala Balam Sadami Manasya Virastam Kimhani Sadami Manasya Virastam Kimhani Idam Te Mukambojam Atyantya Nilay Vritam Kuntalai Snigdharakata Gopya Ekam bimba rakta darame Manasya virastam malam lakshalabe Manasya virastam malam lakshalabe Namo Deva Damoda Ananta Vishnu Prasida Prabodhuka Jalabdi Magnam Ananta Vishnu Prasida Prabodhuka Kripa Drishti Vrishnati Dinam Batanu Griha Nishama Magna He Dakshi Drishya Griha Nishama Magna He Dakshi Drishya Kuveratma Jaubada Murtai Vayadvad Tvayamochitau bhakti bhajakritau cha Tvayamochitau bhakti bhajakritau cha Tata prema bhaktim swakame prayacha Namokshe graho mesti damodareha Namokshe graho mesti damodareha Namaste tu damne spuradipti damne Tvadiyodorayata Vishwasya Damne Namaste Stu Damne Spuradipti Damne Tvadiyodorayata Vishwasya Damne Namo Radhikayai Tvadiyai Priyayai Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tobhyam Namo Radhikayai Tvadiyai Priyayai Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tobhyam Devaya Tobhyam Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare Jayo Radha Damodara Radha Damodara Radhe Jayo Radha Damodara Radha Damodara Radhe Jayo Radha Damodara Radha Damodara Radhe Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Parajik Jasta Tarasatri Shri Shri Sri Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gogopinath Sam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Mayapura Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Tulasi Devi Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Ganga Maya Ki Jai, Jamuna Maya Ki Jai, Samavela Bhakta Vindi Ki Jai, Damodar Astakam Ki Jai, Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled Lord, all glories to the assembled Lord, all glories to the assembled Lord, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Pavani Ki Jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamiti Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pacharini Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatani Jai Sri Prabhupada. Okay, next time.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Praladadayine.
Praladadayine.
Hiranyakashipurvaksha. Shilatankanakalaye. Ito Narsima Parato Narsima. Yato yato yamitato Narsima. Bahir Narsima, Hridaye Narsima. Narasimha Madim Sharanam Prapade. Tava Kara Kamalavare Nakam Adbhuta Shringam Lalita Hiranyakashipu Kanubringa Keshavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare.
Tavakara Kamalabhare Nakam Adbhuta Shringa Lika Hiranyakashipu Tanubringa Ishavadita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadesha Hare Jai Jagadesha Hare Jai Jagadesha Hare
Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha
Sita Nadari Rupa Jaya Jagadesha Hare Jaya Jagadesha Hare Jaya Jagadesha Hare
Jaya Narsimha Dev, Jaya Narsimha Dev, Jaya Narsimha Dev, Jaya Narsimha Dev.
Jaya Narsinga Dev, Jaya Narsinga Dev, Narsinga Jaya Narsinga Dev.
Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj. Jai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Hare Bol, Nitai Gaura Hare Bol. Shingdev Bhagavan ki jai. Pindaye Tulsi Devaya Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Pindaye Tulsi Devaya Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Bhakti Devi Satyavratai Namo Namaha Vrindaye Tulsi Devaya Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prati Devi Satyavratai Namo Namaha Vrindaye Tulsi Devaya Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prati Devi Satyavratai Namo Namaha Tulsi Devi Maharani ki jai.
Love. Namo Namaha Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha
Radha Krishna Seva Pao Ye Abhilashi
Krishna Seva Pava Abhilasi
Radha Krishna Seva Pao Ye Abhilashi
Radha Krishna Seva Pava Abhilasi
Ye Tomara Sharan Loy Tara Vancha Purna Hoy
Ye Tomara Dharana Laya Tana Vancha Puna निवेदना द्वारा शक्तिरनुगत कर
सेवाधिकार दिए कोरो निज दासी
सेवाधिकार दिए कर निज दासी
दीन कृष्ण दासे को यही जेना मोरा होय
दीन कृष्ण दास को ये नमोरा
श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदाई न भासी
गोविंद प्रेमे सदय न दासे
श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदाई न भासी
श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदय न भासे
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
ani cha papani mahadhyadikani cha tani tani vadagavandi radiksenatade rade
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
कृष्णा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare.
जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी
Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani.
जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी
Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi. Tulsi Devi Maharani ki jai, Vrindaye Tulsi Deva, Priyaye Keshavasya, Vishnu Bhakti Pali Devi, Sachivrata Namo Namaha. Vrindaye Tulsideva Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Satyavrata Namo Namaha. Vrindaye Tulsideva Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Satyavrata Namo Namaha. Vrindaye Tulsidevi Maharani Ki Jai. Mr. Barak, Krishna Vastaya, Bhutali, Srimati, Bhakti, Vedanta, Swami, Tanami, Namaste, Saraswati Devi, Kumachani, Visesman, Skati, Sutta. O Tulasi, beloved of Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire is to obtain the service of Shri Sri Radha and Krishna. Whoever takes shelter of you as his wish is fulfilled. Bestowing and resting upon him, you make him a resident of Vrindavan. My desire is that you also grant me a residence in the pleasure groves of Shri Vrindavan. Thus, within my vision, I will always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower of Gary James as of Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own maid servant. This very fallen and lowly servant Krishna praise. May I always stream in love Shri Radha and Govinda. Tulsi Devi Maharani Ki Jai.
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sri Kyastakam Ki Jai. Chito Darpanamarjanam Bhavamada Bhagni Nirvapanam Shri Akari Vachandrika Vitaranam Vidya Vadhu Jivanam Anandam Buddhivardhanam Pratiparam Purnamrita Swadanam Sarvatmasnam Param Paravijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Baudhani Sarva Shaktis Tatrapita Niyamita Smarane Nakala Etadrishita Vakipaya Bhagavan Mamapi Durdaivam Drishamya Janinanuraga Trinadapi Sunichena Tarorapi Saishnana Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari Nadhanam na janam na sundarim Kavitamba Jagarisha Kamaye Mama Janmani Janmanishwari Bhavatar Bhakti Rahituki Tvai Ainanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitamam Vishame Bhavam Buddho Kripaya Tava Pada Pankajastitaduli Sadrisham Vichintaya Nayanam Galorashudharaya Vadanam Gadagadharudaya Gira Pulakari Sitam Papukada Tavanama Grahane Bhavisati Yugaitam Nimishena Chakusa Pravusaitam Shunyaitam Jagad Sarvam Govinda Virahe Name Aslishva Padaratam Pinastumam Adarshanar Marmatam Karotuva Jatat Thava Vidadatu Lampato Matprananatastu Saivana Para Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sri Kyastakam Ki Jai. Glory to the Shri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart all the dust accumulated for years, and extinguishes the fire of conditional life for repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan moment is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we're always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings. And thus you have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names, you have invested all your transcendental energies. There is not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, Out of kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by holy names. But I'm so unfortunate I have no attraction for them. Once you chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than straw in the street, one should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer our respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your cause that divorce from service birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yes, some or other, I am falling in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up? And will the hairs of my body stand on the end of the recitation of your name? Oh, Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and you sure remain so, even if sunders me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord unconditionally. Shri 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 Kirstakam Ki Jai. So there are 10 offenses in matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that should be avoided. They are as follows. 1. To blaspheme devotees, dedicate your life for propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2. To consider names the demigods, the Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, to be equal to or independent of the name Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the orders of the spiritual master. 4. To blaspheme the Vedic literature or literatures and pursuits of Vedic version. 5. To consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretation of the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities on strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8. To consider chanting Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are offered in Vedas as fruitive activity karma kanda. 9. To instruct the fearless person about the glories of holy name. And 10. To not have complete faith in chanting the holy names and to maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions on this matter. It also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success. Krishna Prem. Now let us offer our most humble obeisance unto all the Vaishnavas, devotees of the Lord. They are just little trees that can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Kuti Vaishnavrinda ki jai.
Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 2 Chapter 8 Verse number 10. Aja Shri Jati Bhutani Bhutatma Yad Anugrahat Dadrase Yena Tad Rupam Nabi Padma Samudbhavaha. Aja, one who is born without a material source. Srijati, creates. Bhutani, all those materially born. Bhuta Atma, having a body of matter, yet whose anugrahat, by the mercy of, dadrise, could see, yena, by whom, tatrupam, his form of body, nabi, navel, padma, lotus flower, samudbhava, being born of. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Brahma, who was not born of a material source, but of the lotus flower coming out of the navel abdomen of the Lord, is the creator of all those who are materially born. Of course, by the grace of the Lord, Brahma was able to see the form of the Lord. Purport. By His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The first living creature, Brahma, is called Aja, because he did not take his birth from the womb of a mother, materially born. He was directly born from the bodily expansion of the lotus flower of the Lord. Thus, it is not readily understandable whether the body of the Lord and that of Brahma are of the same quality or different. This must also be clearly understood. One thing is, however, certain. Brahma was completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord, because after his birth, he could create living beings by the Lord's grace only. And he could see the form of the Lord. Whether the form seen by Brahma is of the same quality as that of Brahma is a bewildering question. And Maharaj Pariksit wanted to get clear answers from Srila Sukadeva Goswami. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Brahma, who was not born of a material source, but of the lotus flower coming out of the navel abdomen of the Lord, is the creator of all those who are materially born. Of course, by the grace of the Lord, Brahma was able to see the form of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. These questions by Pariksit Maharaj are phenomenal. They're amazing questions. And obviously, he wants to clear any doubts in his mind about who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the Supreme Worshipable Person, who he should completely surrender to and take refuge in. And for the benefit of everyone else also, in the age of Kali, he's getting all these very, let's say, enigmatic questions answered, so that there's no equivocation, that there's no doubt who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is important because if you have a false conception of who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and many people have that false conception, then your life will be incomplete. You will not be able to go back to Godhead. So it's very, very important to know this science of Krishna. It's not the theory of Krishna. There's no if and but. It's the absolute truth. And Srimad Bhagavatam is concerned primarily with the supreme absolute truth, personality of Godhead. So, therefore, we have to thank Maharaj Pariksit for asking all these questions, right? I mean, he's on the cusp of dying, but yet he's taking his time and wanting to know and clarify all these things, not only for himself, but for us also. So, either we want to reinvent the wheel in every generation, or we want to take advantage of what was already established and not waste any time in understanding what is the supreme absolute truth. So this is a decision that we have to make. Do we want to, just like one time this person called me up and he said, oh, I read some of your things on your webpage and it's interesting. How did you get involved in the spiritual life? I said, well, I was fortunate enough to meet my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who's a pure devotee of Krishna. And I decided to surrender to him and learn from him who is Krishna. He said, oh, well, I don't want to do that. I said, you don't want to do what? So I don't want to surrender to anyone. I want to figure everything out myself. I said, you're a fool. You're a rascal. You're a nonsense. You'll never be able to do it. So, well, how do you know that? I said, because much greater people than you have tried to do that, and they all failed. So why are you going to be successful? Well, I think I can do it. I said, well, okay, then there's not much to discuss. He said, this everybody wants to reinvent the wheel, although it's already been invented a long time ago. But instead of taking advantage of that, they want to do it on their own. But how can you do it on your own when you have lust, anger, and greed? You have 4 defects. You make mistakes. You're easily illusioned. And your senses are imperfect. And there's a cheating propensity. Right there, he was demonstrating his cheating propensity. Oh, I don't want to surrender to anyone. Wait a minute. The whole purpose of life is to surrender to Krishna. You're going to say that also? I don't want to surrender to Krishna? You see how they're crazy. They've already surrendered to Maya. They're completely under the grip of Maya. That's why they're talking nonsense like that. So, the first living creature is Brahma. And he's called Aja. Aja means that he did not take his birth from the womb of a mother materially born. All of us take birth from the womb of a mother, and we all have a material body that covers our soul. And most people remain confused or don't understand the difference between the body and the soul. And they have help to do that. Like the Christian church helps you to think you are the body and not the soul. Although they talk about the soul, but then they split it into 2 parts. One is soul and one is spirit. So try and figure out what is the difference between the two. They explain it. And then, but they say you have to have a body to be resurrected when Jesus Christ comes for the second coming, and then have a final judgment, and hopefully you go back to Godhood. You go back to heaven. So there is a bodily concept of the soul in Christianity. On the other hand, there is a similar type of thing in Judaism and Islam, because they all have to protect the body after it dies. So they have cemeteries, they have mausoleums, they have all these different things to protect the body. Of course, the body disintegrates, but the bones will still be there. And the idea is that in the second coming, either of the Mahdi or of the Messiah or of Jesus Christ, the Muslims talk about the Mahdi, and the Jews talk about the Messiah. And 2,000 years ago, some people thought Jesus was the Messiah, but the Jews rejected that. And then the Christians, they talk about Jesus Christ's second coming. So what happens then? Supposedly, all the dead souls who were Christians or Muslims or Jews, they're going to be resurrected from in the cemetery, and then there's going to be a final judgment. And some people will go to hell. Some people will be eliminated, and some people will go back to heaven. If you go to hell, there's no way you can get out. That's it. You're done. You're fried forever. Some souls are going to die and never be resurrected, never even go to hell. They're just going to be finished. And some will go to heaven. So there are many questions that come up with an explanation like that. Many, many questions. And most of them are not answered because there's ambiguity in the Abrahamic religions. Of course, they'll say there's no ambiguity, but there is. And many questions can be asked, and the answers are not very satisfactory. That's why people who are trained in material science, they lose their faith in religion because they say there's too many things in the religion that are not empirically explained. Empirically means what you can see or perceive with your senses. So therefore, we don't accept that religion is science. It's what you believe. You can believe anything you want. You can believe there's yellow people on the moon if you want, but that's not science, they say. Well, this is the famous argument between science and religion. And for many years, people have been trying to make a middle ground where science and religion meet together and join together. So they've succeeded in some ways because the Christians have changed some of their philosophy in order to accommodate the Big Bang and blah, 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 this thing and that thing. But all that is based on ifs and maybes. They're not sure about it, but because there's such a clamor of science, 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 so therefore, instead of saying the world began 5,000 years ago, they begin to accept that the world maybe began 4 billion years ago. Of course, that's not true either, but these are the theories that go around, and eventually people begin to accept them to make a accommodation by which they can synchronize the Christianity with modern science. Okay, but that's impossible because the Christians have also started what they call the discovery. No, they call it the what is it called? Anyway, they have this institute in Seattle, by the way, in which they try and prove that there has to be a God because of the extremely complicated nature of eyes and bodies and this thing and that thing, and it could not happen by accident. It could not happen by a non-personal nature that uses infinite numbers of combinations and eventually gets things right and creates a single cell and then human beings and then that thing. So they show that it's impossible to do that by what they call the design. The design is so complicated that it would be possible. In fact, one of our devotees, Sadaputta Prabhu, who was a mathematician, of course, unfortunately he died, he wrote a book. In fact, I paid for that book to be published, in which he mathematically showed that it's impossible to have such precise, complicated bodies and organs like the eyes or this thing and that thing by a process of random combinations and of matter. He proved that it was impossible mathematically. Of course, you know, I thought that book would be shattering for the karmis, but it wasn't, unfortunately. People sort of ignore it. So that's the game that the materialists play. Anything that doesn't fit into their narrative, they just ignore it. They don't give it any publicity. They don't take it seriously, and it sort of ends up being a book on a shelf, and eventually everybody forgets about it. So that's why Prabhupada, why did he choose to translate the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam? Because there's such a volume of knowledge that you can't forget it. I mean, you can try. People obviously are trying to forget it, but the devotees won't let them forget it. And therefore, eventually, Bhagavatam is going to triumph because it is the solution to all problems in the age of Kali. First, we have to convince our devotees. There's so many books now. You can see so many books over there written by this one and that one, right? But actually, you should just study Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. You know, those other books are for the karmis to help them come to taking seriously the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. But for devotees, it should be specifically Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. If you have some energy, Nectar Devotion and Chaitanya Charitamrita. But the main thing, what the sages of Naimisharanya decided after 1,000 years of discussion was that Srimad Bhagavatam is the solution to all problems in the age of Kali. So that we should be really focusing on Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, because Bhagavad Gita is spoken by Krishna about himself, and Srimad Bhagavatam is spoken by pure devotees about Krishna. So both of those books are the summum bonum literatures in the age of Kali. Okay, so one thing, however, is certain. Brahma was completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord because after his birth, he could create living beings by the Lord's grace only, and he could see the form of the Lord. So when Brahma appears, he's confused because creation hasn't taken place yet. So all he sees is darkness. He goes all the way down to the bottom of the stem of the lotus flower and doesn't see anything. It's all dark. And he comes back again, sits on top of the flower, lotus, and hears the syllables ta pa. So he engages in ta pa, or tapasya. And for a very, very long time, and eventually he hears the Lord's flute play, and it illuminates his mind with knowledge, and eventually he also sees the Lord, as it says here. And then he understands, he gets the knowledge to transform the energy into matter, and he populates the universe with living entities. He becomes the first Prajapati, produces other Prajapatis, and then the material creation goes from the subtle pradhana to the Mahat Tattva, which is the sum total of all the material elements, and he begins to organize it. So you cannot organize something without an organizer. And we see that everything that functions in a systematic way has an organizer or has someone behind it. Nothing happens automatically as if no one was behind it. It's the same with nature. Nature is perfectly ordered, and there was someone who organized the whole thing. It's originally Krishna, who gives the knowledge to Brahma to do the actual work. Krishna doesn't have to work. He's completely transcendental, and he's always enjoying with his devotees. But he can expand himself like the Narayana or the Vishnu incarnations, and they can also give knowledge to different living entities like Brahma, and then Brahma and people like him, Shiva and Durga, they can do the work. And that's what CEOs do. They hire people to do the work, and they just direct them. They have a certain strategy, and sometimes it succeeds and sometimes it doesn't succeed. But they are orchestrating the whole thing. You can't say, well, yeah, Amazon, Microsoft, and Oracle, they all started by accident. No one was behind it. But that would be ridiculous. You know someone is behind it. So if everything in the material world has to have someone behind it because it's an organized system, then why not the whole universe, which is the most organized system, which functions most perfectly? How can you claim that no one did that? You see, these are all ridiculous conclusions. But because we're living in a world full of speculators, we sort of go along with all that speculation and become misled. So yesterday, I started speaking about Einstein and showing Shastric evidence that his conclusions about God were wrong, right? And I didn't quite finish what I had yesterday, and I'm going to go even further today. But anyway, let's read a little bit about Einstein from Wikipedia. It says, Einstein used many labels to describe his religious views, including agnostic, religious non-believer, and a pantheist, believer in Spinoza's God. So here we have four different ifs and maybes here about Einstein's understanding of God. First of all, he says he's an agnostic. Agnostic means he doesn't accept God exists, he doesn't reject it. He's just waiting to get some evidence to convince him or one way or to convince him in the other way that there is no God. Right? And then a religious non-believer. Now you try and understand what that means. That's an oxymoron, a religious non-believer. And then a pantheist. That means he believes that there are many, many gods. And then Spinoza's God. Well, Spinoza's God is Mayavad philosophy. So 4 failures here on the part of Einstein. Einstein believed the problem of God was the most difficult in the world. Hey, he's right. Even he couldn't understand it. Because he can't understand it. He said, this is the problem of the world. But yet, a little child who says, Hare Krishna, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God, can understand. Well, how come he can't understand? He's supposed to be the smartest person in the whole world. You see, so he's not that smart. That's the whole point. And then he says, he believed the problem of God. What's the problem of God? if you understand who God is, it solves all problems. There's no problem with God. There's a problem with us. So you see, this is the trick of the atheists. They always blame God. They're never responsible for anything, right? And then he says, this is the most difficult to understand in the world. A question that could not be answered simply with yes or no, he conceded that the problem involved is too vast for our limited minds. Well, this is all nonsense speculation by Einstein, right? He said, well, it's too much for us to understand, so let's just give up, right? So, therefore, we see where it says in the Bhagavad Gita, 5th chapter, 15th verse. What does it say? It says, nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. Well, we can say maybe Einstein was able to interpret other people's research in a way that was more significant than the researchers realized. And basically that's what he did. He wrote basically 4 papers in 1905 that established him as one of the most prominent physicists, mathematicians in the world. But not right away. It was because of some British guy who, on a total eclipse of the moon, was able to verify one of the theories of Einstein, that in space, light can bend, and therefore you think you're seeing something straight before you, but actually it's something else. And I'm not going to explain it. I don't understand it completely myself, but this was his theory of relativity. In other words, a lot of observation depends on the person, and many times there are optical illusions, and people misunderstand things. And he gave a lot of examples of that. And he said eventually people would be able to recognize that light bends at certain places in the universe. And then what we see is not actually what is. And this one person, he said, but he theorized that you would have to very carefully measure things in a full moon eclipse to understand this. And there was a full moon eclipse. Someone had to go down, I think, to South America or to Africa, and to see the eclipse and measure things. And then he came back and said Einstein was right. The light does bend in certain ways in the universe, and therefore his theory of relativity is true. Einstein himself did not do that experiment, right? Now, and we don't really know if the person who did that experiment told the truth or not. We don't really know. But one thing that did make Einstein more accepted as a brilliant person was the atomic bomb, because his E equals mc squared was a opening for the atomic bomb scientists, that you could release energy by breaking atoms, and there's 2 types of energy that's released. It's by fusion or by explosion. So therefore they tried to release energy by breaking atoms, and it worked, and he made the atomic bomb. So Einstein himself was mortified when that happened, because he didn't want his theories to lead to destruction. But see, that's what it was, and therefore he's considered, although he didn't do the research, he's considered the father of the atomic bomb. So in this 5.15, it says, the Sanskrit word vibhu means the Supreme Lord who is full of unlimited knowledge, riches, strength, fame, beauty, and renunciation. He is always satisfied in himself, undisturbed by sinful or pious activities. Well, see, that's extremely important about Krishna. And if you want to be a liberated soul, you have to arrive to that same position of Krishna, not being disturbed by sinful or pious activities, and being satisfied by contemplating Krishna in your heart. And it says, he does not create a particular situation for any living entity, but the living entity, bewildered by ignorance, desires to be put into certain conditions of life, and thereby his chain of action and reaction begins. So, therefore, sometimes Einstein blamed God, and sometimes he just said it's too difficult to understand. There's things that we'll never understand. Well, blaming God for our mistakes is a big mistake, the biggest mistake you can make. And in this verse, 5:15, it makes it very clear in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna does not create a particular situation for any living entity, but the living entity, bewildered by ignorance, desires to be put into certain conditions of life, and thereby his chain of action and reaction begins. So everything depends on the desire of the living entity, and we can see ourselves, we are being derailed on a daily basis by propaganda and publicity to believe things. Just like this one devotee, I was telling him, if you want alkaline water, I can tell you how to do it. It's very easy, and it won't cost you anything. He ignored what I said and bought a Japanese machine for $4,000 or $5,000 to make alkaline water. And he thought this would solve his wife's health problems and his health problems, right? He got convinced by the publicity, and he bought it, and he paid the money, right? And then it's like buying a bread making machine, or we call those ice cream making machine, right? You buy it, you say, oh, we're going to make ice cream. We're not going to buy any more, Breyers or dryers. We're going to make it ourselves. Well, it only lasts about 1 or 2 times, and then the machine ends up in the cellar somewhere or on a shelf, and it's never used again, right? So that's what happened with this $4,000 alkaline water machine. He bought it. There was a science behind it. All the promises were there. You'll never get sick again, blah, blah, blah. It was all a hoax. It wasted his money. And I told him, look, I can tell you how to make alkaline water. It's very easy to do. And he ignored what I said and went ahead and wasted that money. So this is the problem. Ignorance is self-imposed. No one is forcing you to be ignorant. They can just point to ignorance and make it look good. Like, for example, you can put poison in a bottle and put a label, pure nectar. So people just believe the label, right? Just like on a label it says, organic amla muraba. And then you look at the ingredients, but it's such small print that you might not even notice it, right? You don't notice that there's sodium benzoate, potassium benzoate, and other highly poisonous preservatives in the amla muraba. And then, millions of those bottles are sold in India every year. There are hundreds and thousands are sold every year in India, and people are drinking it thinking they're going to be healthy, but actually it contaminates them. So that's called ignorance, right? Not reading the fine print, because one is bewildered by the promises that they make. Just like my friend got bewildered by the promises made by the publicity of the alkaline water machine. So there's no panacea for health. Everyone is going to get sick sometime. Everyone's going to die sometimes. Those are laws of nature. But if you just follow Krishna consciousness, then you'll avoid 90-95% of the problems that most people have. Most problems are caused by illicit sex, by meat eating, by gambling, and speculating. Those are, but in that order. Illicit sex causes a lot of problems for most people, and all kinds of different problems. I won't go into all the different varieties of problems, but it's a very problematic thing. And meat eating creates all kinds of problems. And gambling and speculating also, it just creates tons of problems, anxiety and so forth. So therefore, it's incumbent on us to actually believe what Krishna is saying and what the Acharyas is saying, if we want to avoid most problems of life. And the problems that are unavoidable, they will not disturb us. We will not be fearful of them, because we are preparing for our next life by engaging in Krishna consciousness. And if we believe the Siksastakam of Lord Chaitanya, then he says that Nadanam, Najanam, Nasundaram, Kavitam, Vajagadishikamaye, Mamo Janmani, Janmani Swari, Bhavatat Bhaktira Haitukitvaye. I don't want any amount of wealth, I don't want any victims for my sense gratification, and Nadanam, Najanam, Nasundaram, and I don't want any followers. I don't have to be a guru. I don't have to do this or that. I don't want to dupe any people, and I don't even want to go back to Godhead. I'm satisfied if I can always remember Krishna, or as it says in the Damodarastakam, that the only thing I want is to be able to keep my mind focused on this vision of Madhya Soda and Damodar, or as the Hare Krishna Mahamantra says, the only thing I want is your service, birth after birth, Krishna. So you see, that's the real hallmark, or that's the real sign that someone is liberated. They're not disturbed by anything in the material world, either good or bad. They realize that everybody has a relationship with Krishna, that Krishna is present everywhere. Nothing is independent of him. So if anything happens, it's some plan of the Lord, and therefore the devotee is not disturbed in any situation, good or bad. And he sees the equality of all living entities. That includes the plants and the insects and so forth. And therefore he has no hankerings and no lamentation. Right? And then he has so much love for Krishna that every decision that he makes has to be related to staying close to Krishna. So, therefore, he has no dualities in life. The dualities are, oh, should I live in India? Should I live in the United States? Should I buy this car or that car? Should I buy this stock or that stock? Should I marry this person or that person? So people are overwhelmed by these dualities. But someone who has love for Krishna and says, I don't care about anything else. I just care about serving Krishna. So anything that is favorable to serving Krishna, that's what I'm going to do. So that's why in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter, 66th verse, in the purport, Anukulyena Krishnana Silanam. So that purport says, accept everything favorable for Krishna, reject everything that's not favorable for Krishna, accept Krishna as your only protector, and do not have any other interest in life other than serving the Lord and being connected to the Lord. Accept everything that happens as the mercy of the Lord, whether it's good or bad. So, anukuliyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjanam raksisyaititi vishvaso gotritven varanam tata atma nikshepa karpanye sadvida saranagati. These are the 6 steps to complete surrender, or the process of surrender to the Lord. You accept everything favorable to serving the Lord, reject everything unfavorable, accept that the Lord is the only protector, and also that number 4, he is your maintainer. Raksisya goptritre varanam tata. He is your only maintainer, and whatever happens, you accept it as the mercy of the Lord and remain humble and meek in the process of devotional service. So these are the 6 steps of surrender. And if you surrender in this way to the Lord, then the Lord guarantees that he will protect you. So his guarantee that he will protect you is ironclad. So we should believe this. because either that or you have to believe there are black holes. You have to believe that science is perfecting itself all the time, so there'll always be new theories in the future. And you have to believe that there's no God and there's only matter. So you have to cancel the spiritual world. You have to cancel the material world if you're a Mayavadi, because that's an illusion also. And you have to cancel your own reality as a person. And you just have to merge into some nothingness like the Buddhists think, or you have to merge into the light as the Mayavadis think. Or if you're a complete atheist, when you die, it's all over. That way you cancel everything. Brahma Jyoti, Vaikuntha, Goloka, the material world, everything. You know. So this is all negative stuff, very negative stuff, and it leads to wasting one's life and being continually in the mode of ignorance. So therefore, in this purport 515, it says, the living entity is, by superior nature, full of knowledge. Nevertheless, he is prone to be influenced by ignorance due to his limited power. The Lord is omnipotent. He has all powers, but the living entity is not. The Lord is Vibhu, or omniscient. He knows everything, past, present, and future. But the living entity is Anu, or atomic. Because he is a living soul, he has the capacity to desire by his free will. Such desire is fulfilled only by the omnipotent Lord. So whether you want to go back to Godhead or whether you want to have sense gratification, you can't do it without Krishna's help, because he's the supreme controller, Parameshwara. See? And so when the living entity is bewildered in his desires, the Lord allows him to fulfill those desires. But the Lord is never responsible for the actions and reactions of the particular situation which may be desired. So this is what Einstein rejected. He did not believe that God is involved in any way in the good or bad that happens to people. This is, so his concept of a personal God, and it says, Einstein expresses skepticism regarding the existence of an anthropomorphic God. Anthropomorphic means he looks something like us. He has one head, two arms, two legs, so forth. And but actually it implies that we project onto the concept of God our own illusions, right? So an anthropomorphic God is a God that's created by people in their likeness, right? Such as the God of the Abrahamic religions. That includes Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, right? Often describing this view as naive and childlike. In a 1947 letter, he stated, "It seems to me that the idea of a personal God is an anthropological concept which I cannot take seriously." In other words, it was created by people. Right? In a letter to Beatrice Froelich on 17th December 1952, Einstein stated, "The idea of a personal God is quite alien to me and seems even naive." So anyone who claims that Einstein believed in God, no, well, what God? Let's ask that question. What God? What is his God that he believes in? It's not the God that's in the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. It's not the God of the Christians. It's not the God of most of the Jews. It's the God of Spinoza. And we'll get to that in a minute. For me, and it says, prompted by his colleague L.E.J. Brouwer, Einstein read the philosopher Eric Gutkind's book, Choose Life, a discussion of the relationship between Jewish revelation and the modern world. On January 3, 1954, Einstein sent the following reply to Gutkind. "The word God is for me nothing more than the expression and product of human weaknesses. The Bible is a collection of honorable but still primitive legends, which are nevertheless pretty childish. For me, the Jewish religion, like all other religions, is an incarnation of the most childish superstitions." In 2018, his letter to Gutkind was sold for $2.9 million. But whoever bought it for $2.9 million was an idiot, because it's not even worth to be toilet paper, his letter. You know. See, that's how stupid people are, and because he has all this fame, they think, oh, whatever he says has got to be true. It's not. He was ignorant when it came to knowledge of God. On the 22nd March 1954, Einstein received a letter from Joseph Despentier, an Italian immigrant who had worked as an experimental machinist in New Jersey. Despentier had declared himself an atheist and was disappointed by a news report which had cast Einstein as conventionally religious, meaning a normal either Jew or Christian or whatever. Einstein replied on 24th March 1954, so 2 days after he got the letter, right away he's replying. It was, of course, a lie, what you read about my religious convictions. A lie which is being systematically repeated. I do not believe in a personal God, and I have never denied this, but have expressed it clearly. If something is in me which can be called religious, then it is the unbounded admiration for the structure of the world, so far as our science can reveal it. Well, your science has only revealed very, very little, not even 3 or 4% of the structure of the world. In his book, Ideas and Opinions, 1954, actually it should be they should change the title to Ideas and Speculations, right? 1954, Einstein stated, in their struggle for the ethical good, teachers of religion must have the stature to give up the doctrine of a personal God. That is, give up that source of fear and hope, which in the past placed such vast power in the hands of priests. In December 1922, Einstein said the following on the idea of a savior. Denominational traditions I can only consider historically and psychologically. They have no other significance for me. In other words, I don't believe in it. It's a bunch of nonsense. Right? So that's who Einstein is, right? So you can see he is exactly what he's accusing the Christians or the Jews or the Muslims to be. He's childish. He's frivolous. He's accepting things based on his own speculation, but not based on fact. And he's not even trying to accept that there may be facts. Okay, so then now let's talk about his conception of Spinoza, who he thought was the smartest man that ever lived. Pantheism and Spinoza's God. Einstein had explored the idea that humans could not understand the nature of God. In an interview published in George Sylvester Vierek's book, Glimpses of the Great, 1930, Einstein responded to a question about whether or not he defined himself as a pantheist. He explained. So pantheist means you believe in many gods, right? Pan means a very big encompassing concept, right? And so a pantheist, a believer in Pan, that there are many gods, that anything could be God, right? Einstein had explored the idea that humans could understand the nature of God. In an interview published in George Sylvester Vierek's book, Glimpses of the Great, 1930, Einstein responded to a question about whether or not he defined himself as a pantheist. He explained, your question is most difficult in the world. He's saying this is the most difficult question in the world. It is not a question I can answer simply with yes or no. I am not an atheist. I do not know if I can define myself as a pantheist. That means you're nothing then, right? The problem involved is too vast for our limited minds. May I not reply with a parable? So he's saying, let me tell you a story using animals, and let's see if that'll make sense. The human mind, no matter how highly trained, cannot grasp the universe. We are in the position of a little child entering a huge library whose walls are covered with the ceiling with books in many different tongues. The child knows that someone must have written those books. It does not know who or how. It does not understand the languages in which they are written. The child notes a definite plan in the arrangement of the books, a mysterious order, which it does not comprehend, but only dimly suspects. That, it seems to me, is the attitude of the human mind, even the greatest and most cultured toward God. We see a universe marvelously arranged, obeying certain laws, but we understand the laws only dimly. Our limited minds cannot grasp the mysterious force that sways the constellations. I am fascinated by Spinoza's pantheism. I admire even more his contributions to modern thought. Spinoza is the greatest of modern philosophers because he is the first philosopher who deals with the soul and the body as one, not as two separate things. This is nonsense. So if Spinoza actually did that, he's also nonsense, right? You see? Einstein stated, "My views are near those of Spinoza's admiration for the beauty of and belief in the logical simplicity of the order which we can grasp humbly and only imperfectly. I believe that we have to content ourselves with our imperfect knowledge and understanding and treat values and moral obligations as a purely human problem, the most important of all human problems." So here we see he's deflecting responsibility to try and understand who God is by saying you can't understand. Now, is that a fact? No, it's not a fact. If God explains himself very simply, as is the Bhagavad Gita, and others, authorities, explain God as in the Srimad Bhagavatam, you can understand. You can understand up to 78% who God is. So he is can't. You see, what do they do? Any book is going to limit you. So one book says, don't eat meat, become a vegetarian. Another book says, eat meat, don't become a vegetarian. See, so every book is going to try and limit you in some way. And our books, they say, don't believe the speculators, believe Krishna. So we're also, Prabhupada said, every book is going to try and limit you in one way or another, right? So if you're limited to get rid of speculation, that's a good thing, right? And when you're trying to understand, like Einstein is saying, look, we hardly understand anything about the universe. Even as E equals mc squared, it's questionable. Therefore, if you don't understand, then why don't you hear from someone who does understand? That Krishna understands. He's the one that created it. And he's explaining it also in depth. But see, because of false ego, he will refuse to accept Krishna, but yet he accepts a phony like Spinoza and believes all his speculations. So that is, I'm going to stop right there now. We'll go a little bit further in this, because this man was supposed to be the smartest man in the world, but as far as God is concerned, he's the dumbest guy in the world. You see, and if you don't understand these things, and this is exactly what Prabhupada did. He would always ask the devotees, bring some important man to meet me. I want to discuss with him. And every time these very important men came, by hearing the discussion, the devotees became more and more convinced that the guy was an idiot. He was not really that smart, although other people accept him as a guru or some big guy, right? But when the person was face to face with Prabhupada, it turned out that he was an idiot. Like you look at Cardinal Daniel Liu, you can see that on the internet. You know, he was the head of the Catholic Church. And he was almost on the level of the Pope, right? He was the head of the Catholic Church in France, and he was famous, right? He was an idiot, total idiot. Didn't know what the heck he was talking about, right? Okay, so we'll stop right there. Unless you become convinced of these things, you'll become convinced that after 3, 4 generations, 5 generations of the British educating young Indians in India, that the Vedas are nonsense, and science and scientific research, that's where the real life is. And it's nonsense. It's false. But the British were able to convince 4 or 5 generations of Indians to look down on the Vedas and look up to the Bible, and especially science. Even the Bible they reject. It's science. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. But here's the biggest scientist, and he's saying we hardly understand anything about the universe.
Maharaj, I don't know if it gets covered in the Srimad Bhagavatam, but at what point Durgamata, who is controlling the material energy, gets created?
Oh no, that's in the Bhagavatam.
It's in the Bhagavatam.
Oh yeah. When the Devas are confronted was an invincible enemy, Mahisasura. They were not able to defeat him. And it was understood that only a woman could defeat him. So that's when Durga appears. And then she becomes invested with weapons by all the Devas, including Krishna, who's not a Deva, but Vishnu. He also gives her weapons. And that's why she has 10 arms and weapons in each arm. she was invested by the devas, and then she was able to kill Mahisasura. That's when she appears. But actually, Deva is an expansion of, Durga is an expansion, like all women are, of Radharani. And she is in charge, she's in charge of the prison of the material world. And she specifically gives people material success and then takes it away from them. So they've become completely frustrated. And in their total frustration, when someone is completely frustrated and doesn't see any victory at all in their life, they start grabbing straws, right, to try and save them. So there's a chance that people will become Krishna conscious if they're totally defeated. So that's what Durga does. She totally defeats the living entity. That's why if you're married and you don't treat your wife good, she will totally defeat you. then she turns into Durga. And if you treat her nicely, she becomes Yoga Maya. Helps you go back to Godhead. So you have to decide what you want in life. Haribol. Glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Can I start?